the melt and stretch of cheese.
Stretchability and meltability of cheese are the essential functions in nachos and pizza, and the soul of a grilled cheese sandwich. Pasta filata cheeses are typically famous for stretchability and meltability.
But what do we really mean when we say that cheese stretches or melts? Stretchability. Stretch is the ability of casein network to maintain its integrity and not break when pressure is applied to the cheese. A simple way to observe the elasticity or the stringy behavior of mozzarella is to watch it ooze on top of pizza. Chemists will tell you that a substance melts when it changes from a solid or crystalline state to a liquid. A food scientist will describe melt as the ability to flow or spread. One significant matter is that stretchability cannot happen without melting. Therefore, to acquire desirable stretchability, melting should happen first. But it doesn't mean all melted cheese can also stretch. Generally, we think of cheese melting from high heat, perhaps during baking or grilling.
However, some cheeses like ripened camembert or Limburger actually melt or flow at refrigeration temperature.
A stretch is most often associated with high temperatures, but like melt, it can occur at much cooler temperatures as well. What type of stretchability is desirable?
The most common method to measure stretchability is based on the fork test.
The more the cheese stretches, the higher the stretchability. But other attributes such as having multi-strings are extremely important. Also, the texture of the stretched cheese shouldn't be gummy and maintain its stretchability at lower temperature. Melting and stretching process and technology.
To melt and then stretch cheese, we need a stretching cooker. A cooker is a piece of machinery that can provide both mixing and heating processes.
Average quality cheese, which will be defined later, needs to go under slow mixing pressure to restructure from its original form to a new phase of melt combined with stretchability. During this period, other ingredients are added, such as emulsified salts, oil-based additives, coloring, or flavoring agents. The science behind stretchability, from milk to pasta filata cheese. In practice, the liquid milk changes to a solid cheese, and then by some reactions and processes, it changes to a melted cheese which can have the stretchability. How well cheese melts and stretches depends on the chemistry and thermodynamic properties of its casein network, so we need to consider how is the chemical formation of casein from milk to pasta filata cheese. Most of the casein found in milk is in the form of micelle or bundles that consist of several casein molecules. During the clotting process, the micelles form aggregates. The clot or coagulum is an interconnected network of aggregates. Calcium is the main component that works as a glue of this network. Considerable space which exists between the aggregates, and these spaces or pores are filled with serum and milk fat. After the coagulum is cut, individual cut particles begin to shrink, losing serum in response to steering, heating, and acid development. The aggregates come closer together but do not necessarily fuse. Micelles within the aggregates and micelles of adjacent aggregates begin to fuse only if the casein molecules are able to rearrange and form new associations with other casein molecules. How to change curd to pasta filato.
To make pasta filato cheese, the cheese and its structure need to be looser and flexible. This happens when the pH of the curd decreases or when emulsifying salts in processed cheese are used. Simultaneously, there is a loss in calcium phosphate from the casein, and then it uncurls more, and the open structure can increase dehydration of the casein.
So, by this partial ion exchange between calcium and hydrogen from acid or sodium from emulsifying salts, casein uncurls more. It just needs a thermomechanical process to relax and form new interactions and bonds, but in a different way.
Lower pH level or higher ion exchange with the emulsifying salt can cause more calcium bonds to be taken out. It is extremely important not to let calcium be taken out more than required, because if the curds are too loose, they will retain meltability but lose stretchability. Factors affecting meltability and stretchability.
Casein network determines the quality of pasta filato cheese and plays an important role in its main properties, stretchability and meltability. Therefore, any change in its original structure affects its quality. 1. Intact casein. The most important variables are 1. Cow's genetic specifications, feeding, lactation period, etc. 2. pH decrease due to growth in microorganisms. 3. Protholytic activities due to original enzymes like plasmin or microorganisms proteases. 4. Complicated changes due to high somatic cell counts. 5. Adulteration. 2. Curd quality. Pasta filato is a type of a stretched curd cheese, not a fermented one. Its main features are 1.
Milk heat treatment. 2. Fat percentage, moisture percentage, and calcium content, ionized colloids. 3. Starter cultures and fermentation. 4. Rennet type and renneting. 5. No cutting and whey treatment. 6. Curd treatment.
Milk fat globules are surrounded by these aggregates but do not interact with them. Think of fat as an inert material between aggregates of casein micelles. It does not form any part of the casein network, but it does influence cheese melt in a big way. Individual casein aggregates are small compared to the average-sized fat globule. These giant fat globules break up the continuity of the casein network. The more fat globules in the cheese, the less dense and further apart the casein aggregates are from each other. Thus, there are fewer interactions between aggregates. This weakens the network and results in a cheese that melts and stretches more rapidly and at a cooler temperature than lower fat cheese. But it shouldn't be over fat. Cheese higher in fat content may require a higher bound calcium content, higher pH, to maintain stretch and desired melt, and vice versa for lower fat cheeses. Bound calcium phosphate content of cheese is affected by many factors, including factors influencing calcium content of the milk include feeding practices, more grain equals higher calcium, stage of lactation, late lactation equals less calcium, and animal health. Mastitis equals less calcium. Casein content of the milk and pH of the milk and cheese during cheese manufacture. Increasing the moisture level of cheese will also increase melt and stretch, but the mechanism is different. Increasing the moisture content of cheese does not guarantee an increase in melt or stretch. 3. pH adjustment and applying emulsifying salts. At higher pH 6.6 and 6.7, the main interaction between casein molecules involve calcium phosphate. As the pH decreases, the calcium phosphate dissolves from the casein and is replaced by hydrogen, H+. There is an increase in melt and stretch as the pH decreases. However, if the pH falls too low, the stretch characteristic can be lost. At a low pH, the caseins aggregate into large masses, but there are too few contacts or interactions between the masses to allow stretch. The actual pH at which cheese will begin to melt or stretch or lose a stretch depends on casein content and bound calcium phosphate. Emulsifying salts in processed cheese do the same job as H+ via Na+ or sometimes K+. When ESR applied, the pH shouldn't be lower than 5.40 and is normally preserved between 5.40 and 5.80. 4. Thermomechanical process. Stretching cooker is applied for this process. High shearing is not suitable because it can break the strings, so the agitators are mostly in the shape of a screw or auger, which can come in single or twin forms, but in older devices, paddle mixers are still used. The speed of heating up and the final temperature is very important. New technologies have direct steam injection system, which is very useful in this process, but many companies are still using indirect systems. Research shows the best temperature for this process is from 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, but it can be higher, up to 80 degrees, in processed cheese making depending on different conditions of manufacture. 5. Cheese aging. During the aging process, the cheese mostly gets proteolyzed. Although in some cases, like when we have high casein content, high calcium content, or even higher pH than normal conditions, this aging can have a slightly positive effect, but normally we try to keep the casein intact. Breakdown of the peptide formed by the activity of these proteinases has little effect on melt or stretch. Therefore, since bacterial proteinases act on these peptides and not on intact casein, the starter proteinases have very little effect on the melt or stretch of cheese. While the strains of yeast or bacteria may be active against intact casein, however, all mentioned effects can be the same on melting and stretching during the cheese aging. To sum up, this video was about stretchability. It's necessary to understand and control intact casein in curd, calcium content of curd, ions exchange of calcium with H+ or Na+, and thermomechanical process of curd by stretching cooker. Thank you very much for your attention.